Hello. Thanks so much for being a Patreon supporter, and this is the August monthly connections video for 2019. And I just got back from a conference in Portland, Oregon called Willamette Writers, and I belong to that organization, and they've got, I think it's 6 different chapters now, all in Oregon, except for there is now a Vancouver, Washington chapter as well. That's brand new. And I co-chair the Eugene chapter of Willamette Writers. So I had a few hats to wear at the conference, but I was super happy to be there, and I got to, I volunteered for a few things, but I also got to attend a lot of the classes, and I took copious notes. And in the podcast, I am going to do kind of a conference roundup and go through some of the high points of the classes that I took, some of them anyway. So what I wanted to do for this monthly connections video is actually share one of the, I was going to say plague, but that's totally not the right word. Plight, that's the word I'm looking for. The plight of the writer that goes to writing conferences, comes back with loads of books. And I am a chronic book buyer. I love to read, so that makes it nice and easy, but I do have an entire bookcase full of books that I have not read yet. And actually, earlier this year, as part of a KonMari exercise, I actually went through and culled a bunch of books, which of course now I wish that I hadn't, but I went through a bunch of the books that I had read already that were not like 4 or 5 stars in my head. You know, like I read this book, I thought it was amazing, so I'm keeping it. Or I read this book when I was a kid and I've loved it ever since then, so I have sentimental attachment, so I'm keeping it. Or I really like this book for this reason, I might even read it again, so I'm going to keep it. That sort of thing. The hardest part was to KonMari the books that I had not yet read, because that seemed impossible. Like, why would you get rid of something that you hadn't read yet? And I bought it for a reason, so I was interested in it at one point, or maybe it was a gift, whatever. So what I did was give myself permission to get rid of books that didn't spark joy at that moment, because that was the exercise, obviously. But I also went through and looked for the negative reaction. So if I picked up a book and was immediately felt guilty because I hadn't read it yet. I've had this book for 10 years and I've not read it yet. I'm so horrible. Like, I totally got rid of that for sure. Because if I hadn't wanted to read it for, I believe the books come into your life for a reason. And that if it comes in too soon, it's not going to resonate with you. Like, sometimes I've bought a book because it sounded interesting or it sounded useful, and I'd start reading it and it just didn't work. I couldn't get past the first few chapters, and so I'd shelve it. And then years later, I'd come back to it and read it, and it was amazing, So obviously, I believe that was the time when I was supposed to read that book. That was when I needed it. So sometimes books come into my life too soon. And so this again was an exercise in letting go of being in charge of holding on to a book that wasn't right for me then and wanting to have it available right when I needed it. And instead, like, kind of letting go and recognizing that if I need to read this book, it will come back to me. I'll be reminded of it. I'll check it out again. Maybe I'll look at it in the library this time instead of buying it for the second time. So yeah, I got rid of a lot of books, and I let my writing community kind of have first dibs, and they took about half of them. I had, I want to say like 5 or 6 bags of books that I had read or not read, and I let them go through it first. So I got rid of about half of them, and then I donated the rest of them to an independent bookstore here in Eugene, Oregon called Tsunami Books. At any rate, that was kind of a long preamble to, I have a lot of books that I have not yet read on a bookcase, and I have a lot of books that are on different e-readers. I have a Kindle and I have a Kobo e-reader, and those both have books on them that I have not yet read. So there's a lot of books that I need to read, and I still compulsively buy more books. So if you are a new writer and you feel like, what's the point? There's so many authors out there, or I can't write this book because there's already this book out there, or anything like that. Write your book. There will be somebody that will buy it and want to read it. There are so many writers who read. There are so many readers that just read. There's those whale readers, they call them, the ones that like scoop up books and inhale them like whale do with krill. And they just swallow giant swarms of books or krill. So yeah, I look at my book purchases with a little bit of chagrin because I know I have so many other options for reading, but I feel like I'm supporting local artists and writers, and so I keep buying. So here is the stack of books that I came home from the conference with, and I also have a stack of ideas or recommendations for books that in the classes in the conference or talking with someone would recommend a book and say, oh, you got to read this. It's a great example of character voice or something like that. Then I would jot that down, and I'm not promising myself that I'll buy these books, but I am promising myself to look them up and see if it's a book that sounds interesting to read. But these are the ones that I've already purchased. So I just wanted to kind of do a little book splurge presentation, I suppose. So actually, oh no, I don't have it in here, so I'll just have to tell you. So the book that I've already started reading that I purchased at the conference is a book by Hallie Ephron. And she's a mystery, thriller, suspense writer, and it's not a genre that I normally read in, but I took one of her classes, and she's a delightful lady, and I have a little selfie picture with her, and she signed my book. So the one I bought was called, oh no, it's in the other room. Never is in the title. Oh no, I forgot what it was called. It's about a doll, a handmade doll. Her and her sister, the main character, had dolls, and the younger sister disappeared when she was like 4 or something like that. And like 20 years later, 20 or 30 years later, the doll shows up again. So that's the beginning of the story. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. Actually, I'm only a few chapters in. So yeah, the mystery, of course, is like, where did this doll come from? What happened to the little girl all those years ago? I can't believe I forgot the title of the book. Never is in the title. And Hallie Ephron is the author. So crap, I'm sorry. This is a great way to start off a video. The next book I bought is called Red Clouds, or Clocks. My goodness, Red Clocks, by Leni Zumas. And this is a futuristic book about, well, women's lives. So it's a period of time in America where abortion is illegal and in vitro fertilization is banned. And the Personhood Amendment grants rights of life, liberty, and property to every embryo. So it takes place in a small fishing village in Oregon. There's 5 different women and their stories and how they're navigating these barriers alongside age-old questions surrounding motherhood, identity, and freedom. So, yeah, it just sounded really poignant and, unfortunately, maybe even a little bit like what's sort of happening in the United States right now, even though it's, sci-fi speculative fiction. I listened to Jeff Goins, who is a podcaster. He does the podcast, The Portfolio Life, which I listen to. I don't listen to it every week, but I listen to it regularly. And he has several books out. And this one I purchased is called, I don't know if you can see it. The light is so, Real Artists Don't Starve. Timeless Strategies for Thriving in the New Creative Age. So, yeah, I'm really interested to see what those timeless strategies are for thriving artists. That was the only nonfiction book I bought. I was happy to report that I mostly only bought fiction this time around, and I'm usually a pretty heavy nonfiction reader. And I've recently reminded myself that as a fiction author, I need to be reading fiction too. Because I tend to read a lot of memoir, which I'm also a memoir author, so that's okay, and nonfiction, because I like to read about business and entrepreneurship and authorpreneurship. So yeah. So my friend Maren, she's the co-chair for the Corvallis chapter of Willamette Writers. I went to her book launch party, and this just came out, and I read her. The first book I read by her was called A Fuzzy Logic. It's an alpaca farm story. And I like alpacas. And so it was a delightful little story. Kind of a romance, but more women's fiction, I would say, than romance. And so Sparks is another ranch story, but it has monsters in it too. Romance, monsters, and magic for grown-ups. So I'm looking forward to that. That's by Maren Anderson, called Sparks. And then I also met Kenyon, who lives in Wenatchee, Washington, which is the place that my great-grandmother lived. I remember being in her red farmhouse in Wenatchee, Washington, when I was a little girl. And my grandmother was awesome. She was this very slight woman. She had like size 5 feet, and she had fire engine red hair that she colored until, I don't know, probably the day she died. And she played piano, and every time we went there, there was always rock candy. That was delicious. And I remember her farmhouse, and I remember the swing outside that I loved. And I've seen pictures now as an adult of her house, and I think it's awesome and charming and would love to live in it, to this day. But anyway, Kay, also delightful author, met her. This is actually the second book in this series. And so I am going to, I put the preview for the first book in this series on my Kobo e-reader so that I could remember the title so I could buy it later. So I wanted to get a physical copy because I wanted her signature, her autograph. So, so I have the first book to read on the e-reader, and then I have the second book, and then I think this is a trilogy, so there'll be another book. Although, let's see when it came out, when the 2018 was when this came out, so maybe, it's only 2019, so maybe the third book isn't out yet in the series. And then 2 more in this pile. The Child Finder by Rene Denfeld. And this is a gorgeous, haunting gem of a novel. And it talks about another disappearance of a child. I don't know why those are coming into my life right now. My kids are older, so I'm happy to not have nightmares now about little children getting lost, or like my own children getting lost. I had those dreams back when my kids were little. So I'm not sure why these books with that same theme are coming into my life right now, but that's kind of a harrowing thought. Maybe I won't think on that. But anyways, it sounds interesting. I'm going to check it out because it also takes place in the Pacific Northwest, which is where I live. And it's a private investigator that has this uncanny talent for finding lost people. And the character arc of Naomi, the private investigator, sounds really interesting because in the quest to find this missing child, she has to go through some of her past baggage and unlock the secrets of her own life. So it sounds really interesting. And then the last book that I purchased is called I Never Stopped. And this one has to do with grief, which I also write about and read about and lived. So I think that's why I pull back to this topic from time to time. So the main character, Francesca, is grieving the loss of a partner, or maybe it's her mother. Anyway, she it's a ghost story, which I like, so I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to just read the backs of books because that could be boring for you. So that was the list of books that I bought, and I just want to read through the titles of the ones that were recommended to me in case you want to go and then check those out to see if they would be good for you as well. Excuse my runny nose. I cleaned the carport out. What is today? Today's Thursday, Tuesday. So that was 2 days ago, or a little less than 2 days ago. And I have been sneezing since then. And I knew it was a dust, pollen-y kind of thing from cleaning out the carport, but I'm surprised that it has hung on this long. And I can tell it's allergies and not a cold because of, I don't know, the way it's sitting in my throat and in my nose, and I can tell. Okay, The Fifth Season is a book that was recommended for, I think, voice reasons. Tanna French, the book in the series, first in the series, I think is called In the Woods. I have not checked these out myself. This is just the list that I came away from the conference with, and it's my list to go and check myself. So I'm not recommending these. These are books that were recommended to me for various reasons. Tanna French's series, I think, they're either mystery or thrillers, but they're written with a real literary bent to it, which I enjoy, so I wanted to check them out. Jeff Goins also has a couple of nonfiction books that I didn't know about. So I thought I knew all the books that he'd written, but there's one called The In-Between and one called Wrecked. So I just wanted to check those out and see, what they were about and if it was a topic I wanted to read about. The Tipping Point and Outliers. I've never read any Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know what that says about me, but I think it's high time I read some Malcolm Gladwell. And actually, I think my husband has some of his books here in his shelf, so maybe I'll check that out first before I buy anything. A Parrot's Lament, I've heard, was really funny. I don't know. The Legend of Sam Hill is by Robert Dugoni, and Robert Dugoni is a thriller author, but The Legend of Sam Hill is not a thriller. It's a literary novel, kind of like he wrote a whole bunch of thriller stuff, and this is sort of his foray into literary fiction. So I wanted to read that because I tend to read more literary fiction than thriller because I get scared easy. Defending Jacob apparently has a very good reveal. This was a recommendation from Hallie Ephron, who taught a class on mystery and how to reveal secrets in your mystery novel. And so she said that Defending Jacob had a very great reveal at the end. So I wanted to read that just to see what that reveal was. And then Readers of the Purple Sage is kind of like, it sounds like it's sort of Western in space. So kind of like Firefly. That's what I'm thinking it is. And I took the class by the author, and she taught about grammar. The author is Tex Thompson. I don't know if that's her author name or not, though. But anyway, the class was on grammar, and that was one of the books that she'd written, so I wanted to check it out, too. Magic is for Liars. That's kind of a Gillian Flynn sort of literary fiction, but with a little bit of magic, so I really dig that kind of stuff, so I wanted to check out that book. And I think that might be all on my list. There were a couple of YouTube series or videos that were recommended too. One by Ira Glass, who does that NPR stuff, and his YouTube video is called How to Tell a Story. And then there was another one that Jeff Goins recommended called Everything is a Remix. The idea that all the stories, have been told, and how to take an old idea and make it yours and not be stealing, So those are all of the other books that I want to check out too. So I left the conference with a ton of books that I want to read. And I try not to feel overwhelmed at all the books that I need to read. And I struggle with feeling like I'm too far behind in my list of books to read. But when I start feeling that way, I catch myself and just remind myself I have a library here of books. So whenever I want to read a book, I just kind of peruse my stacks and my shelves and find one that resonates with me. I also, if I tend to stick to one genre too long, I challenge myself to switch genres. So read something that I don't normally read, or if it's just sometimes I'll be very nonfiction heavy and I won't leave time to read fiction. So if I read a nonfiction book, the next one I read, I'll force myself to read fiction. Again, I like to read memoir and write memoir too. So I have that in the circulation as well. And anyway, so that's my reading style. That's some of the new books that I'm looking forward to checking out. And I would love to hear your suggestions for books that you want me to read, or books that you loved that you thought were great and you want to share their names and titles. So that's my August connection video. And if you want to hear more about the conference that I attended, I will be doing a podcast episode where I just do kind of an overview of tips that I heard in individual classes that I took. So it's kind of a rundown of conference. It's not going to be an overview of the conference because I'm not going to touch all of the things that were available at the conference, but of the things that I listened to, some of my favorite tips, just in case that is helpful to you if you didn't get to go to the conference. So be well. Thanks for joining me. Thanks so much for your patronage. It means so much to me. And I will see you next month in the next Monthly Connections video.